The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop in front of the general store, sending a cloud of Kansas dust spiraling into the air. And when the door swung open, Catherine Morgan stepped down onto the wooden planks of Abilene with flour dust coating her dark hair like premature snow. She had been wedged between sacks of grain and flour for the last 20 miles after the regular passenger coach broke an axle. And now she stood in the middle of a town she had never seen, waiting to meet a man she knew only through 3 carefully worded letters. The year was 1875, and Catherine had traveled all the way from Boston to become the bride of a cattle rancher named Thomas Garrett. But as she brushed ineffectively at her traveling dress, she wondered if any man would want a woman who arrived looking like she had been rolled in a baker's pantry. A tall figure detached itself from the shadow of the general store's awning, and Catherine's breath caught as she took in the man walking toward her. He wore dusty boots, denim trousers, and a shirt that had once been blue but had faded to the color of a winter sky. His hat was pulled low, but she could see dark hair curling at his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. When he stopped in front of her, his eyes were the deepest brown she had ever seen, warm and assessing all at once. "Miss Morgan?" His voice was low, roughened by wind and sun. "Yes," Catherine managed, acutely aware of the flour still dusting her shoulders and hair. "I apologize for my appearance. The coach had some difficulties, and I was forced to ride with the cargo for part of the journey." The cowboy reached out, and for a moment Catherine froze, but his hand was gentle as it brushed the flour dust from her hair, his calloused fingers careful not to catch on the pins holding her bun in place. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender that Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Welcome to Abilene, Miss Morgan," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her heart beat faster. "I am Thomas Garrett." Catherine had imagined this moment countless times during the long journey west. She had pictured an awkward greeting, stiff formalities, perhaps a chaste handshake. She had not anticipated the warmth in his eyes or the way her pulse quickened when his fingers lingered for just a moment against her temple, brushing away the last traces of flour. She had certainly not expected to feel this sudden, breathless awareness of him as a man rather than simply as the solution to her desperate circumstances. "Thank you," she said, and was pleased that her voice remained steady. "Your letters did not prepare me for how different everything would be out here." Thomas smiled, and the expression transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Catherine's stomach flip. "I imagine Boston and Abilene do not have much in common. Are you hungry? Tired? The boarding house has a room ready for you until the wedding." The wedding. Catherine had almost forgotten that she was supposed to marry this man in 3 days' time as soon as the circuit preacher arrived. It seemed impossible that she could pledge her life to someone she had just met, yet here she stood, her future already determined by the letters they had exchanged and the desperate need that had driven her west. "I would appreciate the chance to wash and change," Catherine admitted. "And perhaps something to eat." The meals on the journey were sporadic at best. Thomas took her carpetbag from the stagecoach driver and offered her his arm with a courtesy that would not have been out of place in a Boston drawing room. Catherine rested her hand on his forearm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the faded fabric, and let him guide her down the dusty main street of Abilene. The town was smaller than she had expected, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to huddle together against the vast emptiness of the Kansas prairie. She could see the general store, a saloon with batwing doors, a blacksmith's forge sending up sparks, and what appeared to be a doctor's office. At the far end of the street stood a small white church, and beyond that, nothing but endless grass and sky. "It is not much," Thomas said, following her gaze. "But the land is good, and the cattle business is strong. I have a ranch about 5 miles south of town, 300 head of cattle, good water, and a house that needs a woman's touch." Catherine heard the hope beneath his words and felt a pang of something that might have been guilt. She had not told him the full truth in her letters. She had written that she was seeking a new start in the West, which was accurate enough. But she had not mentioned that she was running from a scandal that had destroyed her reputation in Boston. She had not told him that her father's business partner had tried to force her into a compromising position, and when she had fought him off, he had spread rumors that she had been the one to initiate the encounter. She had not explained that her own father had called her a liar and thrown her out of his house, leaving her with nothing but a small inheritance from her mother and no prospects for marriage in a city where everyone believed the worst of her. The boarding house was run by a woman named Mrs. Henley, who took one look at Catherine's flour-dusted appearance and clucked her tongue sympathetically. "Poor dear, you look like you have been through a mill. Come along, I will have hot water sent up immediately." Thomas lingered in the doorway of the boarding house, his hat in his hands. "I will come by tomorrow morning if that suits you. There are things we should discuss before the wedding." Catherine nodded, suddenly exhausted by the weight of all that had happened and all that was yet to come. "Tomorrow would be fine. Thank you, Mr. Garrett." "Thomas," he corrected gently. "We are to be married, Miss Morgan. I would be honored if you would call me Thomas." "Then you must call me Catherine." He smiled again, that warm expression that made her feel like perhaps, despite everything, she had made the right choice in coming west. "Catherine, it suits you, sleep well." After he left, Catherine followed Mrs. Henley up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room with a window overlooking the main street. True to her word, the landlady had hot water delivered within minutes, and Catherine gratefully stripped off her dusty traveling clothes and washed away the grime of the journey. As she scrubbed the flour from her hair, she found herself thinking about the gentle way Thomas had brushed the dust from her head, the warmth in his eyes, the solid strength of his arm beneath her hand. She had expected to marry a stranger. She had not expected to feel this flutter of something that might, in time, become more than mere obligation. That night, Catherine lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the frontier town settling into darkness. Somewhere a dog barked, and from the saloon came the faint sound of a piano playing a melancholy tune. She thought about Thomas Garrett and his ranch 5 miles south of town, about the life she was about to begin, and about the secrets she was keeping. She told herself that the past did not matter, that she could build something new here in Kansas, far from the judgment and cruelty of Boston society. She must have finally slept, because when she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window and Mrs. Henley was knocking on the door with a breakfast tray. "Eat up, dear," the landlady said cheerfully. "You need your strength. Mr. Garrett will be here within the hour, and he is the type of man who appreciates punctuality." Catherine dressed carefully in her best day dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her hair up neatly and studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked pale and nervous, but at least she no longer looked like she had been stored in a flour barrel. Thomas arrived exactly when he said he would, and Mrs. Henley showed him into the small parlor where Catherine waited. He had cleaned up as well, his face freshly shaved and his hair still damp from washing. He wore clean trousers and a white shirt, and Catherine noticed that his hands, though calloused from work, were scrubbed clean. "Good morning," he said, and there was something almost shy in his manner that made Catherine relax slightly. He was nervous too, she realized. This was as strange and uncertain for him as it was for her. "Good morning, Thomas." He sat down across from her, turning his hat in his hands. "I thought we might take a walk if you are feeling up to it. I would like to show you the ranch before the wedding. You should see what you are agreeing to." Catherine appreciated his honesty. "I would like that very much." They walked to the livery stable where Thomas kept his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty. He also had a small wagon which he helped Catherine into before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. As they drove out of Abilene, Catherine watched the town fall away behind them, replaced by the rolling prairie grass that stretched to the horizon in every direction. "It is so empty," she said, not meaning to speak the thought aloud. Thomas glanced at her. "Does it frighten you?" Catherine considered the question honestly. I do not know yet. In Boston, there were always people everywhere, always noise and crowds. This is so different. Some people cannot stand the emptiness, Thomas said. They feel like the land is trying to swallow them whole. But I have always found it peaceful. Out here, a man can hear himself think. He can build something that matters. Is that why you wanted a wife? Catherine asked. To build something? Thomas was quiet for a moment, guiding the horse along the rutted track. I wanted a wife because a ranch is not a home without a family. I work from dawn to dusk, and at the end of the day I come back to an empty house. I eat alone, sleep alone, wake up alone. I am good at ranching, Catherine, but I am tired of being solitary. I want someone to share my life with. Someone to talk to in the evenings, someone to plan a future with. I want children someday, if God is willing. I want to build something that will last beyond my own lifetime. His words were simple, but Catherine heard the loneliness beneath them, and it echoed something in her own heart. She had been alone too, even in crowded Boston. After her mother died, her father had become distant and cold, more concerned with his business than with his daughter. And after the scandal, she had been truly isolated, shunned by everyone who had once called themselves her friends. I understand, she said quietly. I have been lonely too. Thomas looked at her, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition and understanding. We will be good for each other, I think, if we are honest with each other and try our best. Catherine felt a stab of guilt at his mention of honesty, but she pushed it aside. The past was behind her. What mattered now was the future she and Thomas would build together. The ranch appeared on the horizon, a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley where a creek ran silver in the morning sun. There was a house, a barn, several corrals, and what looked like a bunkhouse. As they drew closer, Catherine could see cattle grazing on the hillsides, their hides glinting red and brown in the sunlight. It is beautiful, Catherine said, and meant it. The house was simple but solidly built, with a covered porch and windows that would let in the morning light. It was nothing like the grand brownstone where she had grown up in Boston, but there was something appealing about its honest simplicity. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, and she noticed the way his hands spanned her waist, strong and sure. He held on for just a moment longer than necessary, and when their eyes met, Catherine felt that flutter again, that awareness of him as a man and herself as a woman. Come inside, he said, his voice slightly rough. I want you to see everything. The house was sparsely furnished but clean. There was a main room with a fireplace and a kitchen area, 2 bedrooms, and a small storage room. The furniture was handmade but well crafted, and Catherine could see the care that had gone into building this place. I made most of this myself, Thomas said, running his hand along the back of a chair. The table, the chairs, the bed frames. I am not much of a carpenter, but I did my best. It is wonderful, Catherine said honestly. She could picture herself here, cooking at the stove, setting the table for meals, sitting by the fire in the evenings. It was so different from the life she had known, but perhaps that was exactly what she needed. Thomas showed her the rest of the property, introducing her to his 2 ranch hands, Miguel and young Sam, who touched their hats respectfully and called her ma'am. He showed her the barn where he kept his horses, the chicken coop that currently stood empty, and the vegetable garden plot that had gone to weeds without a woman to tend it. I know it needs work, Thomas said as they stood on the porch looking out over the ranch. But I think we could make it into something fine. With 2 of us working together, we could have a real home here. Catherine turned to look at him, this man she had known for less than a day but was preparing to marry in 2 more. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, hope and uncertainty mixed together. Thomas, there is something I need to tell you, she said, the words coming before she could stop them. Something I did not mention in my letters. His expression became guarded. Go on. Catherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I did not come west just for adventure or a new start. I came because I had no choice. There was a scandal in Boston, a false accusation. A man tried to force himself on me, and when I fought him off, he told everyone that I had tried to seduce him. My own father believed him over me. I was ruined, Thomas. No decent man in Boston would have me. That is why I answered your advertisement." She held her breath, waiting for his reaction, for the disgust or anger or rejection that would surely come. But Thomas simply looked at her steadily, his dark eyes serious. "Did you do what he accused you of?" "No, I swear to you I did not." "Then that is all I need to know." His voice was firm, decided. "The past is past, Catherine. Out here, people do not much care what happened back east. They care about what you do now, about the kind of person you are. If you say you are innocent, I believe you." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. It was the first time since the scandal began that anyone had simply believed her, without question or doubt. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and rough against hers. "We all have our reasons for being here, Catherine. The West is full of people running from something or searching for something. That does not make them bad people. It makes them human." Catherine squeezed his hand, feeling something shift inside her chest, some locked door beginning to open. "I will try to be a good wife to you, Thomas. I promise I will work hard and do my best." "That is all I ask," he said. "That and honesty between us, always honesty." They stood there on the porch, hands clasped, and Catherine felt the first stirrings of something that might, in time, become love. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Henley helped Catherine alter a white dress that had belonged to the landlady's daughter, and the women of Abilene, curious about the mail-order bride from Boston, came by the boarding house to introduce themselves and offer advice about surviving on the frontier. Catherine was overwhelmed by their kindness, by the way they accepted her without judgment or suspicion. It was so different from Boston, where every social interaction had been fraught with hidden meanings and careful calculation. Thomas came by each day bringing small gifts: fresh eggs from town, a bouquet of wildflowers, a beautiful piece of turquoise he said was for good luck. They took walks together, and he told her about his life, about growing up in Missouri and coming to Kansas after the war to make his fortune in cattle. Catherine told him about her mother, who had died when Catherine was 16, and about her love of books and music, things that seemed frivolous here on the frontier, but that Thomas listened to with genuine interest. "We will get you books," he said. "The next time I go to Wichita, I will find a bookstore, and perhaps we can get a piano eventually. It might take a few years, but I would like to see you happy, Catherine." The circuit preacher arrived on the 3rd day, just as promised, and that afternoon, Catherine Morgan married Thomas Garrett in the little white church at the end of Abilene's Main Street. She wore the altered white dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Thomas wore his best suit, slightly worn at the elbows but clean and pressed. Mrs. Henley cried, and several townspeople attended, along with Miguel and Sam from the ranch. When the preacher asked Thomas if he took Catherine to be his lawfully wedded wife, he said, "I do," in a voice that rang clear and sure. When Catherine repeated her own vows, her voice shook only slightly. And when Thomas kissed her for the first time, his lips gentle against hers, she felt that flutter bloom into something warmer, something that heated her blood and made her breath catch. They had a small celebration at the boarding house with cake and lemonade, and then Thomas helped Catherine into the wagon with her belongings, and they drove out to the ranch as the sun began to set over the prairie. Catherine was acutely aware that they were now married, that tonight would be their wedding night, and nervous energy made her hands tremble as she smoothed her skirts. Thomas must have sensed her anxiety because he reached over and covered her hand with his. "We will take things at whatever pace feels right to you, Catherine. I am not a man who forces himself on a woman, wife or not. When you are ready, I will be there. Until then, I am content just to have you beside me." His words eased some of her nervousness, and Catherine leaned slightly against his shoulder as they drove through the gathering dusk. When they reached the ranch house, Thomas carried her belongings inside and showed her where to put her things in the bedroom they would share. He had made up the bed with clean linens and put fresh flowers on the dresser, small gestures that touched Catherine's heart. That night, they came together tentatively, learning the geography of each other's bodies, discovering pleasure in the darkness of their room. Thomas was gentle and patient, and though there was some pain for Catherine, as she had expected for her first time, there was also surprising sweetness, a building warmth that left her breathless and amazed. Afterward, she lay in his arms, listening to his heartbeat slow, and felt the last of her defenses begin to crumble. "Are you all right?" Thomas murmured into her hair. "Yes," Catherine whispered, "better than all right." She felt him smile against her temple, and then they slept, wrapped in each other's arms. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was both challenging and satisfying. Catherine had never done much domestic work in Boston, where her father's house had been staffed with servants, but she threw herself into learning how to manage the ranch house. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to make bread and stew and biscuits. She planted seeds in the vegetable garden and tended them carefully. She cleaned and organized, turning the sparse house into a real home with curtains she sewed herself and rugs she braided from rags. Thomas worked long hours with the cattle, but he always came home for supper, and they spent the evenings together, talking about their days. He taught her to ride so she could accompany him around the ranch, and Catherine discovered she loved the freedom of galloping across the prairie with the wind in her hair. He was teaching her to rope cattle, and though she was clumsy at first, she was determined to learn. They grew closer with each passing day, learning each other's quirks and preferences. Catherine discovered that Thomas sang when he worked, old ballads and cowboy songs in a surprisingly good baritone. Thomas learned that Catherine talked to herself when she was concentrating on something difficult, carrying on entire conversations as she worked through a problem. They laughed together, worked together, and at night they came together with increasing passion and tenderness. Catherine was falling in love with her husband. She realized one morning as she watched him work with a difficult horse in the corral. Not the polite affection she had hoped they might develop, but real, deep love that made her heart race when he smiled at her and made her miss him when he was out on the range. Summer deepened into autumn, and the ranch prospered. They sold a herd of cattle in Abilene for a good price, and Thomas used some of the money to buy Catherine the chickens she had wanted and lumber to add a room onto the house. They were building a future together, exactly as Thomas had hoped. But the past, Catherine discovered, was not so easily escaped. She was in town one October morning buying supplies at the general store when a stranger walked in. He was well-dressed in Eastern clothes, out of place among the dusty cowboys and ranchers. Catherine did not recognize him at first, but when he turned and saw her, his face split into a cruel smile. "Catherine Morgan," he said loudly, and every head in the store turned to look. "Or should I say Mrs. Garrett now? How delightful to find you here." Catherine's blood ran cold. It was James Hartwell, her father's business partner, the man who had attacked her and then destroyed her reputation. "Mr. Hartwell," she said stiffly, "what are you doing in Abilene?" "Business, my dear. I am looking into cattle investments." Imagine my surprise when I heard that Albert Morgan's disgraced daughter had landed herself a cowboy husband. "Does he know what kind of woman you are, Catherine? Does he know about your sordid behavior in Boston?" Catherine felt the eyes of everyone in the store on her, felt the familiar shame and anger rising in her throat. But before she could speak, the door opened behind her and Thomas walked in. He took in the scene immediately: Catherine's pale face, the well-dressed stranger's sneering expression, the avid curiosity of the onlookers. "Is there a problem here?" Thomas asked quietly, moving to stand beside Catherine. His hand came to rest on her lower back, a gesture of support and possession both. "No problem at all," Hartwell said smoothly. "I was just renewing my acquaintance with your wife. We knew each other in Boston, quite well in fact." The implication was clear and ugly. Thomas stiffened beside Catherine, but his voice remained calm. My wife's past is her own business, and I trust her absolutely. Now, if you have nothing constructive to say, I suggest you continue with your business and leave my wife alone. Hartwell's eyes narrowed. How noble of you, defending her honor. But ask yourself, Garrett, why would a well-bred Boston girl flee all the way to Kansas to marry a stranger? What was she running from? She already told me, Thomas said, and his voice was like iron. She told me that a man tried to force himself on her and then lied about it to save his own reputation. I assume, from your interest in the matter, that you were that man. Now get out of this store before I throw you out. The silence in the general store was absolute. Hartwell's face flushed an ugly red, but he must have seen something dangerous in Thomas's eyes because he grabbed his packages and left without another word, the door slamming behind him. Catherine was shaking, and Thomas turned her gently to face him. Are you all right? He will tell everyone, Catherine whispered. He will spread his lies here just like he did in Boston, and everyone will believe him. No, Thomas said firmly, they will not, because I will tell them the truth. People in Abilene know me, Catherine. They know I am an honest man, and they will believe me when I vouch for you. Over the next few days, Hartwell did indeed try to spread his poisonous stories around Abilene, but he found little fertile ground for his lies. Thomas spoke to people he trusted, telling them plainly what had happened in Boston, and those people spread the word to others. The people of Abilene had accepted Catherine as one of their own, and they were not inclined to believe the word of an arrogant Easterner over that of Thomas Garrett and his wife. Mrs. Henley was particularly fierce in Catherine's defense. I know good character when I see it, she declared loudly in the general store. And Catherine Garrett is a good woman. That Hartwell fellow is the one who should be ashamed, trying to ruin a decent girl's name. Hartwell left Abilene within the week, his business deals falling through as word spread about his true character. The day he left, Thomas came home to find Catherine crying on the porch, not from sadness but from relief and gratitude. They believed me, she said through her tears. They actually believed me. Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Of course they did, because it was the truth, and because you have proven yourself to be exactly who you are, a strong, honest, hard-working woman. That matters more than any lie some Eastern snake can tell. Catherine pulled back to look at him, this man who had defended her without hesitation, who had stood by her against the demons of her past. I love you, she said, the words coming straight from her heart. I did not expect to when I came here, but I do. I love you so much, Thomas. His face transformed with joy, and he cupped her face in his hands. I love you too, Catherine. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I brushed that flower dust out of your hair and you looked up at me with those blue eyes. I have been falling deeper ever since. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Catherine kissed him back with all the love and gratitude and joy that filled her heart. They stood on the porch of their home, wrapped in each other's arms, and Catherine knew that she had finally found where she belonged. That winter was hard, with bitter cold and heavy snows that sometimes kept them housebound for days. But Catherine and Thomas weathered it together, keeping each other warm and entertained through the long, dark nights. They played cards and read books by firelight, and Thomas taught Catherine to play the harmonica. They made love and made plans, talking about the future they would build together. When spring came, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the joy on his face made tears spring to her eyes. A baby, he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Are you happy? Catherine asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not begin to cover it, Thomas said. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. A year ago, I was alone in this house with nothing but work and silence. Now I have you, and soon we will have a child. I am the luckiest man in Kansas. Their son was born in late autumn, delivered with the help of Mrs. Henley and Doc Morrison. It was a difficult birth, and Thomas paced the kitchen like a caged animal, nearly wearing a path in the floorboards. But when he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst into the bedroom to find Catherine exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced, squalling infant. "A boy," Catherine said softly. "We have a son, Thomas." Thomas approached the bed as if he were walking on sacred ground, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in Catherine's arms. When he reached out to touch his son for the first time, his hand was shaking. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for giving me this gift." They named him William, after Catherine's grandfather, and he became the center of their world. Catherine had never known she could love anything as much as she loved her son, with his dark hair like his father's and his blue eyes like hers. Thomas was a devoted father, rushing home from work each day to spend time with his son, holding him with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough cowboy hands. The ranch continued to prosper. With the money from their cattle sales, Thomas was able to hire more help and buy more land. They added onto the house, building a proper parlor and a second bedroom for William. Catherine planted flowers around the porch, turning the simple ranch house into a beautiful home. When William was 2 years old, Catherine became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to twin girls they named Sarah and Emma. The house was full of noise and laughter and chaos, and Catherine sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands of 3 small children, but she would not have traded it for anything. This was the life she had dreamed of, the family she had longed for. Thomas was a patient father, teaching William to ride and rope, reading stories to the girls before bed, helping Catherine with the endless work of caring for young children. On Sunday afternoons, they would pack a picnic and ride out to the creek, spending lazy hours watching the children play in the water while they sat in the shade and talked about everything and nothing. "You ever miss Boston?" Thomas asked her once as they watched William try to teach his little sisters to skip rocks. Catherine considered the question, thinking about the grand house where she had grown up, the parties and concerts and all the trappings of society life. "No," she said honestly. "I do not miss it at all. That was never really my life, Thomas. It was the life I was supposed to want, but it never fit me properly. This, here with you and our children, this is my real life. This is where I belong." Thomas pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I am glad you got on that stagecoach with flour dust in your hair. I am glad you took a chance on a cowboy you had never met. You saved me, Catherine. You turned my house into a home and my life into something worth living." "You saved me too," Catherine said softly. "You gave me a place where I could be myself, where I could be loved for who I really am. You gave me a family and a purpose. You gave me everything." Years passed, and the children grew. William became a serious, hard-working boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Sarah was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and chasing after the ranch hands. Emma was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love of books that reminded Thomas of Catherine when she first arrived. In 1885, 10 years after Catherine first stepped off that stagecoach, the Garrett Ranch was one of the most successful in the region. They had built a large, comfortable house, employed a dozen ranch hands, and ran nearly 1,000 head of cattle. Thomas had become a respected member of the community, serving on the town council, and Catherine had helped establish a school in Abilene so that children did not have to travel to distant towns for their education. But the measure of their success was not in cattle or land or money. It was in the love that filled their home, in the laughter of their children, in the way Thomas still looked at Catherine across the dinner table as if she were the most precious thing in his world. It was in the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination and love. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Catherine rested her head on Thomas's shoulder and thought about how far they had come. She thought about the frightened, desperate woman who had arrived in Abilene with flour dust in her hair, running from a past she could not escape. She thought about the lonely cowboy who had welcomed her with gentleness and acceptance, asking only for honesty and a chance to build something real. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "About flower dust," Catherine said with a smile. "And about welcome. About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to exactly where we are supposed to be." Thomas chuckled. "You did look a fright that day, covered in flour like you had been in a bakery explosion. But you also looked brave and scared and hopeful all at once, and I knew right then that you were special. I knew I was going to fall in love with you." "Just from brushing flour out of my hair," Catherine teased. "Just from that," Thomas confirmed. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes warm with love. "That one small gesture, and you looked at me like I had given you the world. How could I not fall in love with you?" Catherine reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that years of sun and wind had etched around his eyes. "I did not know what love was until I met you, Thomas. I thought it was something that happened in books and poems, not something real people actually felt. But you taught me differently. You taught me that love is patient and kind and real. You taught me that home is not a place but a person." "You are my home too," Thomas said softly. He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that held 10 years of love and partnership and devotion. When they pulled apart, the sun had set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. From inside the house came the sound of the children arguing over something, and then William's voice raised in exasperation. Catherine started to rise, but Thomas pulled her back down. "Let them work it out," he said. "Stay here with me for just a few more minutes. Let me hold my wife and remember the day she arrived and changed my life forever." So Catherine stayed, nestled against her husband's side, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. She thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment, about the pain and fear and desperate hope that had driven her west. She thought about answered advertisements and carefully worded letters, about taking a chance on a stranger who offered nothing but honesty and hard work, and a dream of building something lasting. She thought about flower dust and gentle hands, about welcome given and received, about love found in the most unlikely of places. And as Thomas held her close and the night settled around them, Catherine knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be, that every step of her journey had been leading her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life they had created together. The children eventually came bursting out onto the porch, William carrying Emma on his shoulders while Sarah danced around them, and the peaceful moment ended in a flurry of hugs and questions and requests for stories before bed. Thomas stood up, swinging Sarah into his arms while Catherine took Emma from William, and together they herded their children inside for the evening rituals of baths and stories and tucking in. Later, when the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Catherine and Thomas returned to their own room. They prepared for bed with the comfortable ease of long familiarity, and when they lay down together, Catherine felt Thomas's arms come around her, pulling her close against his chest. "I love you," he murmured into her hair, the words he said every night, words that never lost their power or meaning. "I love you too," Catherine whispered back, "always and forever." She closed her eyes, safe and warm in her husband's arms, in the home they had built, in the life they had created together. The past was truly behind her now, washed away by years of love and acceptance and belonging. She was no longer the disgraced girl who had fled Boston in shame. She was Catherine Garrett, wife of Thomas Garrett, mother of William, Sarah, and Emma, rancher's wife and beloved member of the Abilene community. She was home. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge, triumph and hardship. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good years and survived lean ones. William grew into a fine young man who managed much of the ranch work alongside his father. Sarah eventually outgrew some of her wildness but retained her adventurous spirit, while Emma became the first person in the family to attend college, studying to become a teacher. Through it all, Catherine and Thomas remained the solid center around which their family revolved. Their love had only deepened over the years, tempered by shared experiences and strengthened by the life they had built together. They still took walks together in the evenings when they could, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still reached for each other in the darkness with the same passion and tenderness that had marked their early days together. When Catherine turned 40, Thomas surprised her with the piano he had promised her so many years ago. He had ordered it from back east and had it shipped to Abilene at considerable expense, then somehow managed to get it out to the ranch and into the house without her knowing. When Catherine came home from visiting Mrs. Henley in town and found the beautiful upright piano in the parlor, she cried tears of joy and threw her arms around her husband's neck. "You remembered," she said through her tears. "After all these years, you remembered." "I remember everything you have ever told me," Thomas said, holding her close. "Every dream, every wish, every hope. I want to give you all of them, Catherine. You deserve the world." Catherine learned to play again, the skills she had been taught as a girl in Boston slowly coming back to her fingers. On evenings when the work was done, she would play while the family gathered around, Thomas's deep voice joining hers in old hymns and ballads, the children harmonizing or simply listening. Those evenings became some of Catherine's most treasured memories, the whole family together in the warm lamplight, united by music and love. In 1890, William married a local girl named Mary, and they built a house on the far corner of the Garrett property. Catherine became a grandmother for the first time when Mary gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after his grandfather. Holding her grandson for the first time, Catherine marveled at the continuation of life, at the way their family grew and expanded, rooted in the love she and Thomas had cultivated. "We did this," Thomas said wonderingly, standing beside her as she cradled baby Thomas. "We built all of this from nothing." "Not from nothing," Catherine corrected gently. "We built it from faith and hope and love. That was always more than nothing." As they grew older, Thomas's hair turned silver and Catherine's developed streaks of gray. Lines deepened around their eyes and mouths, marks of years spent laughing and working in the sun. But when Thomas looked at Catherine, he still saw the brave young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach with flour dust in her hair. And when Catherine looked at Thomas, she still saw the gentle cowboy who had welcomed her with kindness and offered her a home when she had nowhere else to go. They grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren, celebrated members of a community they had helped build. The ranch continued to prosper under William's management, allowing Thomas and Catherine to step back slightly from the day-to-day work, though neither ever fully retired. The land was in their blood now, as much a part of them as each other. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. There was food and music and dancing, and at the end of the evening, Catherine and Thomas stood together on the porch of their home, watching the festivities continue in the yard below. 25 years, Catherine marveled. "It has gone by so quickly, but at the same time I can barely remember life before you." "I cannot remember it at all," Thomas said. "Or rather, I can remember it, but it was not really living. It was just existing, waiting for you to arrive and show me what life could be." Catherine turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "You gave me everything, Thomas. You gave me safety when I was afraid, acceptance when I was judged, love when I felt unlovable. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. You gave me myself." Thomas raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown that first day when he brushed flour from her hair. "And you gave me the same, my love. You turned my empty house into a home full of laughter and love. You gave me children and grandchildren, a legacy that will outlive us both. You gave my life meaning beyond work and survival. You taught me what it means to truly love someone, not just once but every day, over and over again." They stood together in the gathering twilight, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, and Catherine felt a profound sense of completeness. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not the absence of struggle or pain, but the presence of love deep enough to weather any storm. Not perfection, but partnership. Not ease, but purpose shared with someone who knew your heart as well as their own. The music from the party drifted up to them, and Thomas smiled. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Garrett?" Catherine laughed, remembering how she had once been too nervous to dance with him at social gatherings in their early years together. Now she stepped into his arms as naturally as breathing, and they swayed together on the porch, dancing to the faint strains of music and the rhythm of their own hearts. As the stars emerged overhead and the Kansas wind whispered across the prairie, Catherine rested her head against Thomas's shoulder and gave thanks for the day she had arrived in Abilene with flower dust in her hair, frightened and desperate and hoping for a chance at a new life. She gave thanks for the cowboy who had brushed that flower away and said welcome, not knowing he was welcoming her into a love story that would span decades and generations. She gave thanks for the life they had built together, for every joy and every sorrow, for every ordinary day and every extraordinary moment. She gave thanks for the gift of being loved completely and the privilege of loving the same way in return. And as Thomas held her close, dancing under the stars on the porch of the home they had built together, Catherine knew that she had found what everyone searches for: a place to belong, a person to love, and a life that mattered. She had found her home, her heart, her happily ever after. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually the guests departed. Children and grandchildren returned to their homes, and Catherine and Thomas were alone again in the quiet house. They prepared for bed with the comfortable intimacy of 25 years of marriage, and when they lay down together, Catherine felt the same sense of safety and belonging she had felt since the beginning. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Thomas asked, his arms tightening around her. "For everything. For believing in me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me, for being exactly who you are." Thomas was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I think I am the one who should be thanking you. You took a chance on a lonely cowboy with more dreams than sense. You made those dreams come true, Catherine, every single one of them." Catherine smiled in the darkness, her heart full to overflowing with love for this man who had been her partner, her best friend, her great love for 25 years. "We made them come true together," she corrected. "That is what we have always done, together." "Together," Thomas agreed and kissed her forehead. "Always together." As Catherine drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, in the house they had built on the land they had cultivated, surrounded by the legacy of the family they had created, she knew that her story had turned out exactly as it was meant to. The frightened girl who had arrived with flower dust in her hair had become a confident woman who knew her own worth. The lonely cowboy who had offered her welcome had become a beloved husband and father. And together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. A family rooted in love, a ranch that would support generations to come, and a story of two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. That was the real happily ever after, Catherine thought as sleep claimed her. Not the fairy tale ending where all problems disappeared, but the daily choice to love and be loved, to work and build and grow together, to face whatever came with courage and faith in each other. That was the kind of happy ending that lasted, that meant something, that changed not just two lives but all the lives that came after. And as the Kansas stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind sang its ancient song, Catherine and Thomas slept peacefully in each other's arms, exactly where they belonged, living proof that sometimes the best love stories begin with nothing more than a simple gesture of kindness, and the courage to say welcome to a stranger who would become everything.